Howdy, howdy, folks. I hope you have your coffee because I'm going to read you a little short story, and it's not as short as most of mine. And if you feel like you're having an earthquake, you're not. It's my cat. Summers with Alma. She would sit for hours in that beat up gold chair in the corner. And you know the kind, square back and arms with little knots all over it. It looked as if it had done battle with a cat or two, so she would throw an old faded green and gold cover over it. I don't know why. It was uglier than the chair and hardly sufficient. Every time she sat down, it would slip a little more into the crack between the seat and the back. Eventually, she'd have to get up and reposition everything. The little table, lamp, and monogahawed footstool sat beside it for the 9 odd years I knew her. That musty smell, common in a lot of old houses, permeated hers, but with years of floral air sprays and cigarette smoke. Directly opposite her sat an old black and white television that the daily soaps dominated, unless she was eavesdropping on her CB radio. Occasionally, she would listen to the Grand Ole Opera, or Grand Ole Opry as she called it. At such times, she'd remove her glasses, close her eyes, and put her head back. She seemed to stay that way for so long I often thought she might be dead. I would creep over to her and see if she were breathing. Sometimes she'd just be asleep. Other times she would wait till I got close enough. Then she would grab me and start laughing that thin, dry cackle. Once I honestly couldn't tell. So I took her hand mirror off her dresser to put under her nose like they do in the movies. I had barely got it close to her face when her eyes popped open and she said, "Stop that foolishness and put that back before you break it." She scared me so bad I nearly dropped the damn thing on her face. That didn't happen in the movies. Her hair was very gray and rather thin, so she wore it all teased up in a dome. For some reason, she thought it hid the bald spots. She never realized you could see through to the pink scalp beneath. I guess farsightedness has its advantages. She was kind of sallow from a lifetime of smoking, and she wore her skin like an old leather bag. Her uniform of choice was a pair of stretch polyester pants, cut off for the summer, and one of those sleeveless tops we called shells. If she were chilly, she'd throw on a cardigan. Her long red dragon lady fingernails were accompanied by wedding bands on both hands, the remains of two loves who entered and left her life. In the right hand lived an extra long menthol cigarette. God forbid her breath should smell like the rest of her. The inside of her middle and forefingers were literally yellow, testament to the years of devotion to the god nicotine. I've always associated the color yellow with her. This was Alma. She would make one of the biggest impacts on my life. Just under 5'5", fully erect, she was a rather thin, bony woman. Her back was always a source of complaint. In her later years, she walked with the help of a walker. But at one time, she wore a belt with an electrical box that sent out currents to stimulate the nerves in her lower back. A sort of early TENS unit. This was supposed to help her walk easier and without so much pain. I guess you could say she never really warmed to it. The 1970s were a time of changes and adjustments. That's what they told us anyway. What I remember is having to sit in very long lines, sometimes over an hour, to get gas. People complained about the cost of living, that awful music we called disco, the garbage strike in New York City, and sitting in our very hot station wagon one afternoon waiting for Alma. We were parked in her drive with the windows down and the radio on, bebopping in the back seat. Sweat was rolling down our backs as we waited for what seemed a lifetime. So, when she finally did come out of the house, we were all watching. About halfway along the walk, it started. First, a shake of the right leg, then a little kick, then another. Then her left hip jutted out, and she grabbed her back. We didn't know what was going on. We thought she was dancing. We started clapping our hands and laughing, having a good old time. We didn't know the thing was shocking the hell out of her. By the time she got to the car, the belt was off, and words were coming out of her mouth that would make a sailor blush. Our first stop that day was her doctor's office, and no, she did not need a damn appointment. I'm not going there for the fucking congenial. She liked colorful language. When we got there, we all stayed in the car. I never knew what transpired in the doctor's that day, but when she emerged, she had the walker. Visual acuity was not Alma's strong point. She was about as far-sighted as a person could be. Even though she wore glasses, she would scrunch up her nose and upper lip so she could focus. Reading material would be held so far from her face, everyone could read it. My adolescent and teen years were filled with the National Enquirer, the Star, Ellery Queen, and a whole host of pulp fiction. True crime stories were a little too racy for us kids, so she kept them buried in baskets under the Good Housekeeping magazines on the side porch. Now, the side porch was enclosed with those small crank windows. I hate those things. It was a pain in the butt to open those little windows, but once you did, you would get a nice little breeze just wafting through, unless it was fixing to storm. Then you might end up with a mini tornado. Had been known to happen. In one corner of the porch, she had this wonderfully fancy antique lounger all covered with stuffed cushions. It was heaven. This, of course, was the coveted seat. However, if you weren't quick enough to get it, there were the two fold-up outdoor chairs that she threw floral sheets over. Don't worry, tons of pillows were propped up on them to make them more comfortable and appealing. Yeah, right. Red geraniums and ferns sat on little tables around the porch, and beneath them were the baskets full of the infamous magazines. Now, try to keep up. We were aware that she was aware that we knew those little paperback books were out there and exactly where they were. We also were aware that she knew we read them. Every so often, we'd look up at the window and see her squinting back at us. Then we could hear, "What y'all reading? Better not be any of my crime stories." Then we would hold up the Good Housekeeping with the little books tucked inside, and usually she'd go back to her TV. Sometimes, however, She would come out with us to make sure we understood those crime stories were not for kids. And then she would proceed to tell us all about the latest one she had read. Now, the National Enquirer was different. That was breakfast fodder. While most people were reading about national politics or the latest sports scores with their bacon and eggs, we got to hear about the lady in Kentucky who had the alien baby, or the man who found the face of Jesus in his grilled cheese sandwich. According to her, this was a part of our education that the school system apparently lacked. It might be best, though, if we didn't mention it. Summer. Oh, summer. Summer was the thing. Just saying the word, summer, made you feel good. The rest of the school year meant shortened visits, usually on the weekend. But in the summer, we could be there for days, which meant no curfew, for starters. The youngest of us kids, and the only boy, slept in the front bedroom with her, which left the back bedroom for us girls. If we were in the bed by the time she turned out her light, we were fine. We'd wait a few minutes until we thought she was asleep, and then we'd quietly get up and do what we did best, snoop. Only a couple of times did she yell at us for being too loud. Not that we knew what she was saying, since she didn't have her teeth in. Sorry. Being girls, we were all over that room. From the really vintage clothes to the 1950s Bakelite jewelry to a box of old photographs and love letters. The only light we had came from a small lamp on a bedstand at the far side of the room, which we put on the floor with us. There on the rug with a mound of pillows, we read the love letters. We were completely enthralled. They were from a Lieutenant Harris, who was very much in love with her. He must have been stationed somewhere near the coast in England, because he kept comparing the beauty of the landscape, the water, the birds, the cliffs, to her, his dear sweet Alma. Often his letters would end romantically, if not a little gross for our adolescent minds. In Alma's, she would admonish him for something overly romantic he may have said, but then do the same thing. Of course, all of this would go, "Oh, that's so romantic," or "Gross," followed by giggles from us. There were some that we didn't quite understand, things about England or some guy named Jerry. She would write back about working in D.C. or family that we didn't know. One even had a lock of dark hair in it. We read that one. Oh, but we didn't read that one. None of us were brave enough to touch the hair. The photographs were mainly in black and white or sepia. A lot of the women wore hats and gloves and dresses that hung below their knees. The men were in suits and baggy pants. Some of them wore hats too, cocked to the side. There were also photos of men in uniforms, but the one that caught our eye was of a young man with dark wavy hair. He had a little mustache, wore a tank-style undershirt with his trousers, and was looking directly into the camera. Lord, he was beautiful. We had hoped it was Lieutenant Harris, but on the back it read, "Robert, age 21. And that was all. There weren't any other pictures of him, and no mention of him in any letter, just the one photograph to prove he ever lived. In later years, I would find out the letters were between her and her first husband, who had not only survived the war but gave her 2 children. There wasn't a letter with the lock of hair, just the paper it was wrapped in to keep it safe. The hair and the photo of the young man were of her baby brother, Robert, who was hit by a car. He died shortly after that photo was taken. She never said anything more about it, and I didn't ask. Now, the boy, being the youngest of us kids, was always asleep before anyone, so he slept close to the bedroom door. It also meant he woke up first. Usually he would go on to the living room and watch cartoons. One morning, he couldn't get his show to come in, so he did what any kid would do. He went to the only grown-up in the house. A couple of minutes later, there was a blood-curdling scream that woke everyone. He came running out of the room, shrieking and crying, speaking gibberish, and pointed at Alma. After a few minutes, we realized the problem. He had seen Alma's teeth in the glass of water by the bed. When she started to speak, he really freaked. Of course, we busted up laughing, which upset him even more. Eventually, we felt bad for the kid. It was the first time he had ever seen his grandmother's teeth anywhere other than her head. Now, while we did feel bad for him, we didn't feel that bad. All day long, we went around with our lips curled over our teeth saying, "Kiss me, baby," just to get him worked up again. Oh, the joys of having a little brother. While her house was one of the best places to be when I was growing up, it could just as easily be one of the most miserable if you were being punished, especially in the summer. You see, her backyard only had 2 trees. There was a small redbud tree at the back door by the picnic table. The other, a big oak tree, was all the way in the very back of the yard and shaded more of her neighbors than it did hers. In between the 2 trees, there was nothing but a vegetable garden. All garden. The entire yard. I believe her son planted it, but I never actually saw anyone do it. Garden fairy, maybe? We could just show up one warm day and there it would be, all lush, green, and full of things for us to pick, pull, snap, shuck, and shell. And all of it out in the open under the full, sweltering strength of the summer sun. She probably had the best and fullest garden I had ever seen, unfortunately. An afternoon with all of us working together wasn't too bad. A weekend on your own because you were being punished absolutely sucked. I brought home an F on my report card once, and while they all went to King's Dominion, guess where I was? On the upside, the ice cream man came every afternoon during the week all summer long. And of course, we heard him several blocks away. It is a child thing. You have supersonic hearing when the ice cream man hits town. It don't matter what neighborhood he's in, you know he's there. This gave us plenty of time to convince her that we did hear it, we did do everything we were supposed to, and yes, we would get her one too. I don't think I've eaten so many ice cream sandwiches and Nutty Buddies before or since. Summers also meant time spent on the Rappahannock River at the summer house, all 5 rooms of it. Alma and her late husband, and a few assorted workmen, built the place. It was a sitting room, 2 bedrooms, kitchen, bath, and thankfully, 2 screened porches to spread out. The front porch was for the adults, and the larger in the back for us. This was where we spent our time when not in the water or wandering the neighborhood, as it were, which was nothing more than 4 dirt roads and the paved one that led to the marina. Gotta make sure that was paved. That porch was our domain until it was invaded by the adults. Since she smoked like an inferno, Alma spent quite a lot of time with us, listening to the radio. The station out of Warsaw was really the only station we could pick up clearly. We had it on all the time. There wasn't a TV, so radio was our entertainment. She would have us out there dancing, laughing, and carrying on. She used to tell us all about the dances and concerts that she would go to when she was young in D.C. Of course, she would try to show us how to do some of the dances, like the foxtrot and the jitterbug, and we in turn tried to teach her how to do the hustle and the bus stop. If we had all been able-bodied and could do the dances correctly, it might have been a successful and educational exchange between 2 generations. That was not the case. Instead, we were 5 gangly, ungraceful kids and 1 60-plus-year-old woman with a bad everything. What we were was a mess. There were arms and legs going everywhere. We were bumping into each other, tripping over one another. She almost threw her hip out at one point trying to jitterbug, something none of us could quite grasp. We were just one big hustling jitterbug rock and roll mess at full volume for the hearing impaired. I guess it's safe to say that we failed to produce the desired result. Yeah. At calmer times, when the tide was out, she would take us down to the water and show us where to look for crabs, how to find them clinging to the underside of old pieces of wood and other debris. Moving the logs would send them scurrying sideways and burying themselves in mud. We would usually find them hanging out around the base of the pylons under the pier. Along with the crabs, there were the tiny shells strung together, which we always thought were seed oysters. Sometimes they would be closed and stuck to larger shells, but a lot of the time they would just be sad, empty baby shells stuck in the muddy sand. When the tide was out, you could see them sprinkled across the shore like tiny stars, in among the bigger shells, with bits of driftwood and seaweed. At these times, Alma would get the nets. We would spread them out near the logs as carefully as we could, trying not to stir up the mud. We girls would get along the edge of the net, while she and the boy gently rolled the log over. Then they would try to herd the crabs into the net. We would wait for what seemed like forever, mainly because it never really worked. We didn't know that, nor did we care. It was something to do. We did catch a horseshoe crab once, and 2 eels. If we were lucky, she might try to sneak us a bottle of Coke. It didn't happen often, though. Most of the time we didn't get anything. No crab, no Coke. My favorite thing to do was take a long string and tie a piece of raw chicken to one end. Then I'd dangle it in the water off the side of the pier. She showed us how to drop it easy and as close to the post as possible, because that's where the crabs like to hang out. As soon as they grabbed onto the chicken, I would gently start to raise the string and slide a pole net under it. I got more crabs this way than any other. While we sat on that pier, she would tell us all about an aunt she had up in Baltimore who taught her how to crab. Of course, we being girls wanted to know about all her boyfriends or the kind of clothes she wore. Funny, it wasn't quite the way we imagined. Alma grew up in D.C., went through the 10th grade, and had to wear dresses all the time. We could not even picture that. After high school, she went to secretarial school and took a job in an office in D.C., where she met and eventually married her first husband. Unfortunately, that was her second husband. Unfortunately, he ran off with someone she thought was a friend. But she had 2 children to support, so she went back to work. But at some point, she met her second husband, who built things, like the summer house. They never had children together, but he helped her raise her kids as if they were his. When he was around 64 or 5, he had a massive heart attack and died. He was some years older than her, you see, but he was the love of her life. And she never married again. Once a month, we would pick her up and go to the Ponderosa Steakhouse. Going out to dinner with Alma was something of an adventure. For some reason, she would insist on getting food she knew would be hard for her to eat. Steak and corn were the worst, and they were always getting caught in her dentures. She had a bad habit of sucking her teeth to get the food out. If it didn't work, she'd use the edge of a matchbook. But if it were under her denture, that required a trip to the ladies' room. A major expedition indeed, especially if she had that walker. Once this was done and all the food she was going to eat had been consumed, then came the process of reapplying the lipstick. That Dragon Lady Red lipstick that matched the Dragon Lady Red nail polish. For some reason, this was done at the table and was quite a production. Her lips were thin and her hand a bit shaky, both of which made for a very wobbly upper lip. Once it was applied to the mouth, she would have to go back and remove it from the face. Then finally, there was the removal of it from the denture, because heaven forbid there should be some red mingled with the nicotine yellow. Now, you might think that this was a signal that the meal was over. You would be wrong. When all the leftover things, such as unopened salt, pepper, butter packets, rolls wrapped up in a napkin, and anything else she thought could possibly be portable, went into her purse, and only then was her meal finished. Yes, you heard me right. It went into her purse. The dregs of her meal went into her purse. We once found a half-eaten piece of fried fish in the depths of her handbag. No idea how long it resided there. It was kind of gnarly. And don't think for one moment your purse was safe. Oh, no. If there was more than she could safely deposit into hers, then it went into the next available purse. God forbid you should be next to her. By the time I was in my late teens, She had not only acquired the walker, which she would run over you with in a heartbeat, she also had started wearing a hearing aid. Now, say started wearing, when I should say started wearing on special occasions, because that's the only time she ever wore the damn thing. She wore it to church, to the doctor's office, and on Christmas Day up until dinner. According to her, people would be too busy shoving food in their faces to talk, and she didn't need to hear them eat. I do understand living alone, she would not have any real need to wear it. But if she had a visitor, wouldn't that be cause enough to put it in? No. If someone comes to visit, presumably you want to converse with them and not have to yell the same thing 3 times over for everyone to hear. I mean, they may not want to share their incontinence problem with everyone on the block. But the worst part wasn't that you had to yell to be heard, or that everyone else could hear you, or even the weird looks they gave you. The worst part was when she did wear it, she would always have it turned all the way up, so it made this high-pitched shriek. You couldn't hear it, but it sent the rest of us into, or she couldn't hear it, but it sent the rest of us into spasms. Now I know why dogs howl. When I was 17, I moved on. I never heard any more of her, though I often wondered. I'm over 50 now, well over, so I wonder no more. Despite the walker, the hearing aid, the denture, and a whole host of other habits, both unpleasant and strange, she was an intricate part of my youth. Alma was a character who was both surprising and wonderful. She was the one who taught me how to make fried green tomatoes, egg wash, flour, salt, pepper, and dried oregano. She had the largest collection of Harlequin romances I have ever seen, of which I read only one. Alma was the only one who ever encouraged me to write, and one of a small handful of people who ever gave a damn. And to a foster kid growing up in the 70s, it was a big deal. So, I raised a cup of Sanka. She's the only one I ever knew who drank it. To you, Miss Alma, wherever you are. It's not Sanka. Thanks for the memories. Thank you for being with me and hanging out. This has been very long. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there's somebody else out there who can relate. All right, take care.